My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Del Mar Chabad Center, and welcome to The Jewish View. Today we have two very special guests, and they are David Shepherd and Hillel Simon, both from New York, the rabbinical students that have come to the Capital District this summer in order to bring Judaism and Jewish education to really the far-out districts. Welcome first to The Jewish View. Now, really, you're in New York, as I have said. You're students there, but you're both originally not from New York. Maybe you get a little bit of your background, starting with David over here.
Well, I'm from London, England. I was born in London, and I lived most of my life until 16 in London. After that, I traveled to Manchester. I was in yeshiva there for, rabbinical college for 3 years, until 19. Then at 19, I traveled to New York, and I've been there since I'm 23 now, so I'm there almost 4 years.
It's interesting. We always like talking about guests that come from different countries. We have people from Australia and from Europe. There's a nice Jewish community in London.
Oh yes, it's quite large. I mean, it's especially I'm in there's two districts for religious people. There's one in Stamford Hill, which is more Hasidic minded, and there's one in Golders Green, which is religious, but caters for most people. And I happen to live in Golders Green, which is the more richer, you want to call it that, prosperous area of London.
And they don't have higher rabbinic studies in London? That's why you came to America? Or?
That's right. They only have, they have certain rabbis who do give, they do give this type of idea of becoming a rabbi, but the qualifications are not so good. They're not such well-known rabbis, and therefore it's not considered so popular in the world when one looks for a job. Therefore, it's obviously the positions in America are much. They offer a lot more.
Very good. And hello, where are you originally from?
I'm from West Lafayette, Indiana. I was there only till about 12 and a half, really. I came to New York for a year. I spent a year in Israel, and I spent 3 years in Chicago in the yeshiva there. Then I spent another 2.5 years in Israel in Kfar Chabad, Lubavitcher village there. And now I spent about 2.5, close to 3 years in New York with the Lubavitcher Rebbe studying.
And they say it's like United Nations is in New York City, but for the Jewish world also. It seems like everybody seems to be centered in New York City. Now, you are rabbinical students in New York, and you came, and instead of going on vacation, as so many college students do, you spent your summer and going around to these areas. Before we go into what's being accomplished in the Capital District, where else some of your colleagues, your friends, where are they off to?
Well, I have a number of friends who went to South America. They went to it's actually a holiday resort, but the people there going there for a vacation are in for a surprise. But other than that, I have a few friends who went to India. I have one friend who went to Africa, to African states. Besides that, in previous years I had friends who went back to England and traveled around in the different small cities outside London.
Well, it's interesting, because there's rabbis in your major cities, and maybe we can even say in some of the minor cities, but there's very few rabbinical students or even rabbis for sure that can be afforded by communities, and maybe we can call them the boondocks, the far-lying areas. And I think that's concerning the Capital District also, maybe telling us about what you're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, that's really the underlying idea. This is a program, students going out in pairs for, 20, 30 years. And the main original idea was to visit cities where people could not reach, people had no contact. And that's being kept up. People go all over the United States, and now really worldwide, as we demonstrated. But we've been, today, for instance, we're going to Walton, New York. I think that may be the farthest out we've gone. That's 35 miles out of Oneonta, which we thought was pretty far.
And you have contacts there? There are Jewish people there? I don't even know myself living here.
There are Jews everywhere. The interesting thing is we went to Schenectady, that's nearby, last year and this year, and they told us about people in Kobelskil. They said, in Kobelskil they live like Goyim, right? But we went to Kobelskil, the same, there's the same Jews there. And very nice people we met there. You know, it's Schoharie County. They had like 25 Jews in the county used to meet. And then we got sent to Oneonta with someone that told us about a school over there.
It's interesting. Well, really, that's why I say that these little communities, and there's so, I don't know if we can call them communities, but these little pockets of Jewish people in these far-lying areas, 25 people, for example, cannot have a rabbi. And really, they're felt isolated for the most part. And what that means is not just socially isolated, but Jewishly isolated, where there's little Hebrew school for them. There's people aren't going to go to the synagogue. They're not going to be anything to do with Jewish life. There's no Jewish center for them. So just by their situation, they're going to assimilate into their communities, which are in the non-Jewish environment. So I think just coming to them gives them like a booster shot, sure, really, of something Jewish and something meaningful in their Jewish life.
Being at that point of, you know, wherever the Jew is, the Jew is still there, and whatever he's doing. We spoke to someone in Glens Falls. He told us a story of someone he knew for 50 years as a guy. Right? As far as he knew, this fellow was non-Jewish. And one day on Pesach, this guy comes over and says, "Yisrei Chol Hamoed." Chol Hamoed, intermediate days between the first and last days of Pesach and Sukkot are called Chol Hamoed. And here's this guy asking Chol Hamoed, says, "What do you have to do with Chol Hamoed?" So he said, well, 50 years ago, he had a bar mitzvah, and he remembers a few weeks later it was Chol Hamoed, and his mother passed away. And now he woke up to the idea that he wants to say Kaddish. He went to shul, he got the rabbi to say Kaddish, and he started studying. That was like, you know, he said, you can't take the Jew. You can take the Jew out of the synagogue, but you can't take the synagogue out of the Jew. And that's just amazing. You know? Here he was out in Yehudatville, and with just living like a guy, whatever, as far as anyone knew. But he woke up after 50 years.
And that's it. It's going out and touching people and knowing that they see. Obviously, you go have such a Jewish appearance that itself sometimes brings out to people that there's, you know, remembering what they are. You know, just even Saratoga, there's so many people who are just come back to Judaism and feel close to Judaism, and you can say different reasons. Maybe it's the water over there. I don't know, something in the water. But sometimes we could say on a more realistic level, and that they have Hasidic communities there in the summer. Well, we could talk about spiritually, the Torah being learned, but these people don't have any real direct connection, and they're not going to come to the synagogue and learn with these people. But what it means, I think, and I think it's a good answer, is that people see them walking in the streets. So therefore, like just from their Jewish appearance, they think this is what means being Jewish. That they can't, in a way, it puts in a person's mind, well, yeah, you know, I'll forget about the Judaism that it doesn't tell you in the newspapers. Today's like you say, today is Sukkot, and they just fade away, and they just don't have any connection with it. And here it is, a living image in front of their eyes. Yes, here's something to be Jewish. Here, this is what a Jewish person is. They are obviously everything he represents, the religiosity, the Torah mitzvahs. And that's why I say, I think just simply even an appearance, just to remind the person, this is a Jewish person, this is what his appearance is. So that's interesting. I just forgot to say that Hills, actually not this is your first year, this is your second year already coming into the Capital District, and just maybe even goes beyond that. I think the Capital District, really the region is, what can we even say, upstate New York is probably a better description of the territory that you will be covering over the summer. And last year, maybe we can give a belated mazel tov that Pesach Shiner is already, obviously an older student and became married, and now...
I'm getting married myself in September, end of September.
We have to give a double mazel tov. Well, obviously the older students are going on these things. They pick out the older rabbinical students that are the prime territory, time to get married, but it's good that it's good training, don't you think, for yourself. Of course, what you're doing for a community, I think that's what we're portraying is very good. It's excellent, and it's a job that no one else is doing. Certain things you could say, well, someone's doing it, or there's two schools, one school, all right, one school's enough. Two butcher shops, one would be good. You could always have that argument, but like we say, it's something I think that no one else is doing or has been doing. So it's really it's a needed service for us. And we just can't look in our own communities. We look in Albany or in Delmar, wherever we are, We want to try to look into our own little communities, but we have to remember there's Jewish people out there. There's people in these outlying communities, and should we think of them?
I'd like to describe a bit of what we actually do when we meet people. Our chief goal is to raise the Jewish consciousness or level of practice by a bit in each home that we visit. We like to, if someone hasn't put on tefillin, we put on tefillin. We check mezuzahs, we replace a lot of mezuzahs. This year we're visiting a lot of people we visited last year, so they have mezuzahs already last year. But we have some books that we sell just to bring, one of the big mitzvahs, the ideas of the Lubavitch Rebbe in particular, is to have Jewish books in the house and more Jewish knowledge and information going on there. So show a few things. This year's an emphasis on it's called The Year of the Boy and the Girl. So this is one of the children's books we have, very nice children's books, A Trip to Mezuzah Land. It's for small children. It dwells very heavily on the mitzvah of having a mezuzah, which is, like I said, one of our chief goals here.
Well, it's good that there's children's books. I think that should be pointed out, that many times we had in the olden time, I'm not an old man myself, but from we can see in literature that there was only thing, you can always find a rabbinical chumash, a Bible and certain things for the older person, but for a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old or whatever, the youth, that there was really nothing. And by the time they're beyond their youth, they're already turned off from Judaism. They don't want to read the older books. So I think this is an important thing that you're just bringing out. Mezuzah, all right, an adult knows the mezuzah, but here pertaining to a child, you're bringing it down at their level. Mezuzah is so important and so beautiful and part of the Jewish house. But that's, I think, an important part. That's something actually, like I say, a little bit of revolutionary, because just to have so many children's books that should help the Jewish kids to understand the beauty of Torah mitzvahs.
Yeah. Yes, this is a new kashrus book which came out about 6 months ago. I actually was given the position of writing part of it. My name is printed on the beginning under rabbinical consultants. It has Rabbi Herschel Greenberg and it has Rabbi David Shepard, which we heard is my name previously. This book basically goes through the ideas of kashrus through the whole year, very basic ideas and also some more intricate ideas, and also discusses the laws of kashrus, very importantly also on Pesach and Passover. As one will probably know from their parents or grandparents, that Passover, one has to clean out the whole house. There's a lot of work that has to be done. And this book, this will cover the whole year of kashrus-wise. This will keep the the Jewish home living, as it says, the kosher living. And hopefully, it's been a very, very popular sell on our trip down here. And I've heard generally the sales have been up. At the beginning it was a little low, but recently have been picking up quite dramatically, which obviously is good for all of us, and we're pleased with the printing.
This book about kosher is dealing with for which level? I mean, it's a beginning book that someone who doesn't know anything about kosher and thinking about it.
It's for all levels. That's the truth. There's some subjects over here that even when I was writing, and the amount of research I had to make into writing part of the book would just tell us that even on my level, even though I'm a rabbi, I had to do quite a bit of research to write it. So even though it does go down to the very basic level of a person who just merely doesn't understand the real ideas of kashrus, this will give him the beginning step to kashrus. It would also go into some very detailed ideas which are mentioned in Shulchan Aruch of, say, things that should be cooked by a Jew, or should be checked by a Jew. The idea of what we call in Shulchan Aruch, the idea of bishul akum, that it was cooked by a non-Jew, how that spiritually has an effect on a person, and the idea of bread which was cooked by a non-Jew, which also has a spiritual effect on a person, that it is obviously better spiritually to have something which is cooked by a Jew rather than a non-Jew. Secondly, also it discusses in the book the idea of milk, which was checked by a Jew, which many will question why. I mean, milk is milk, but over here there's a story brought down in this book which mentions very clearly the spiritual effect that kosher milk milk which is being checked by a rabbi, has on the effect of a Jew, and Jewish soul.
It's interesting. So, it's a deeper book. I've actually gone through this book myself, and I found it very informative, and it's just, as much as I've known most of the laws, of course, but just the way it's presented is in a very well-written way, and I do have to give my compliments to that, to the way it's
presented. So I'll show another couple. This is like for adults. This is something we've been distributing. I'm sure many people have heard of the victory in the U.S. Supreme Court with the permission to put up public menorahs. This is sort of a short version of a larger book that we display, which gives the menorahs set up in many cities throughout the United States.
Want to talk a little bit about, a lot of the details about the Supreme Court action?
I don't know that much myself, but that they agree that it's a symbol of freedom, religious freedom. And,
it wasn't so much. Well, obviously, the question was against church and state. A menorah is a Jewish symbol.
Right.
People arguing against it said that this was something that, and it was the Chabad movement, of course, that put it up in public, and past presidents, President Reagan, President Carter, have lit the menorah, and they thought it was worthwhile. It's on the White House lawn, so obviously that they thought it was a proper thing. Some groups thought it was an infringement on church and state. Chabad's only meaning was, of course, to symbolize Hanukkah is the festival of lights. It is something that brings light at the time of darkness, the minorities' oppression that was overthrown, and these ideals are consistent and consonant with American ideals and freedoms. And other people thought, on the other hand, that it was the infringement of church and state, and the Supreme Court agreed with the Chabad movement, and many of the governments, obviously including the White House, all the way up, was just that it wasn't religious. No one has to be Jewish to telling someone Jewish to appreciate the menorah. We see it all over. That reflects the idea of the freedom, and in that sense that it's good for America.
What we have to remember is that America was built. Certainly, the founding fathers were religious. They had the idea of people, allowing people to practice all types of religion. And this is symbolizing, as we said, the menorah symbolizing religious freedom, allowing anyone to practice their religion. Often, in the zeal to separate church and state, you're really stamping out the idea of remembering God and a Creator in the minds of children. This is the picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe who was motivating everything we're doing here. All these people throughout the world involved in outreach, and also among non-Jews. We spoke about that last year, actually. He has a project to spread 7 Noahide commandments, laws that were already applicable to Noah, and they were again reiterated at the time of the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, with the idea that the Jews should spread or awaken these moral codes, not to kill, not to steal, and adultery, and not blaspheming God, to set up courts of justice, and not eating flesh from a living animal. And these laws, the chief idea is there should be a peaceful, productive world, and remembering that God is in charge of the world. And then there are many details that come out of it, charity of a non-Jew, and things that you could discuss at length. But there's one more thing I wanted to show. This is the chief book of Hasidic philosophy is the Tanya. This is called Lessons in Tanya. We have the picture of the author here, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, we call the Alter Rebbe. This is the power of this work. The Alter Rebbe was sitting once, looking intensely at one of his manuscripts for this book, and I think his brother-in-law came in, or someone, his brother came in and saw him there studying intensely, and after like half an hour, the Alter Rebbe realized that someone was there. He picked his head up, and he said, I'm thinking of whether to add a vav, add one word, one letter to this. And he said, I'm spending 3 weeks on it, and it's worth spending 6 weeks on one word in the Tanya. And he said every time that he decides to add a connecting vav, to add one letter, he thinks through the entire book. So he really put his life into it, and we can take life from this book.
Have you been setting up any, let's say, programs or classes with people, or it's just like a one-time meeting, them talking a little bit about Judaism, maybe selling them a book or a mezuzah or whatever have you, or we got a group together? Is anybody...
Well, we haven't actually brought groups together, but we have tried, and we've actually spoken with many families, and we've introduced the idea of koshering people's houses, which, we haven't had a chance to do that yet, but we hopefully, during our stay here, we will kosher some houses. Actually, back in New York, I'm one of the people who are in charge of koshering houses. I've visited many, many houses and koshered quite a number of houses, and it's really quite a experience for people who have, up until that date, say, sort of have not kept to the laws and have, just changed this and sort of had to have all their utensils and etc. gone through and koshered. It really has a tremendous effect on these people. That's one of the things we're doing.
That's interesting. So, it's a lot of work. Actually, I should devote a whole show to keeping kosher. I think it's too small just to, we could say, just flip through with a few pages of the book or just a few ideas. Obviously, it's worth many shows because it is a little bit complicated and you do need rabbinical advice to keep kosher. So, it's good that you touch upon that if anybody really wants that kind of advice, that they know where to come from. And again, it's free and no charge, and people were willing to help.
One more book here is a big seller. This is something else we distribute, L'chaim. This actually has an article from...
well, you have to explain what L'chaim. People think that you're giving a L'chaim to everybody over here.
We can't quite... We're driving around, so we can't quite do that with a bandit. But this is a publication in memory of the Lubavitch Rebbe we showed before, in memory of his wife. This is an acronym, L'chaim. Chaim Mushka was her name. This is an interesting article from our own Rabbi Rubin of Albany, and comparing the idea of fusion, right? The new idea of fusion, which is debatable, but he says the fusion between Jews, the eternal connection, the essential connection between one Jew and another is certainly there, and can certainly be brought out, and that's some of what we're doing. Just reminding, I think, even if you call someone on the phone and he's busy that day, but he remembers that he's Jewish, and there's something to talk about. And
there's a connection. Some energy comes out of that connection.
And one more book we have, the popular is the Modern Jewish Woman. We have several books on Jewish woman. This is one of the nicer books.
Well, it's interesting you put out the Jewish woman. I think that's one of the, I could say, the major issues in Jewish people's minds today, especially in America. And we've had women speakers on the show and talking about how, as much as women's liberation looks at the Orthodox Jewish home and the Jewish woman as a second-class citizen, in reality it's very much the opposite. I think it's interesting that you picked these topics, just for our listeners' interest, because I think these are the major keys. So we can say, everything in Judaism is important, but the mezuzah on the door to recognize the Jewish home. And look, when the kids come in, they know this home is a Jewish home. It's important for the people inside, and people outside should know there's Jewish also. Kosher is important. It's the old adage, you are what you eat, and we can't agree more with that. And the Jewish woman, of course, I think as much as, like I say, that people think it's a secondary role, it's very much a primary role what the Jewish woman has to accomplish in her home. And I think what we see in American Jewish life is just, again, I always say it's the Jewish woman's, either to her credit or just the opposite, because she could build or destroy her home. And we see that the family unit really is the center of, it's the center of Judaism. It's right there. It's not the synagogue. We have beautiful synagogues. No one's going to complain about the synagogues of America. You can have the most beautiful buildings in the world, but you see that's not that synagogue, and as beautiful it is not upholding Judaism. And it's the Jewish family with a Jewish woman at the center. On that note, that she feels that this is not a primary purpose. We see what's happening to Jewish life. So I think just the books that you have picked out are with a meaning and an attention to what's the issues facing American Jewry today, and the assimilated Jew at that, especially in, like we say, the boondocks, the far outlying areas. But have you found in general people being receptive? I guess it's a loaded question. In one sense, Jewish people are very much, and they're nice people, but you are coming, let's say you are, come with an Orthodox appearance, and I, like I say, I don't know in these middle of nowhere as if they've even seen an Orthodox Jew pass through there. And it must be a new and strange experience for them. What kind of, in general, maybe the welcoming wagon, what kind of welcome do you get there?
Basically, I mean, not that I'm very acquainted with, with out-of-state New York life, but as I say, I feel that people have been very warm towards us. I mean, the people we have seen, we haven't been successful in seeing everybody. Perhaps we haven't got the time physically to see everybody, but from the people we have seen, I'm personally very happy with the way they've treated us.
Yeah, I would assume so. It's interesting sometimes. Sometimes you get just even a very warm welcome. Oh, I haven't seen a good Jewish person for a long time. And sometimes unfortunately, some people say, "Oh, I gave up on Judaism. I don't want to hear from it." Yeah. Sometimes you do get the other extremes. I would say, generally, I would assume that people are warm people.
We met someone, I think he's like 80, 85 years old, and he's been in Warnerville, which is, is the one Jew who has a steel company in the town. And he's been there like 56 years, and he said we were the first pair. This was last year, and we visited him again this year. But he said then we were the first Orthodox person that had come to speak about Yiddishkeit, just to say hello, Shalom Aleichem. He said and a couple of people came to collect money. That was about it in 56 years. So thank God we came by. Yeah,
connection. Well, that's why I say some people, it's like fresh water, fresh air to them. They haven't seen it. They've almost given up on it.
Yeah.
It's good. So, I mean, just maybe you can say some of the far-out cities, because I tell you, I've been living here a good few years, and I don't know even some of these towns that you've been saying.
Yeah.
You know more about the area than I do.
Well, we based last year, especially in Saratoga and Lake George and Glens Falls. We had a booth there.
Lake George is more your tourists? You're looking for tourists?
Yeah, well, last year we had a booth for tourists. This year, just a few of the stores we became friendly with. A few of the owners there, and we visited them. And there's an interesting fellow there who has a personal custom that any money that falls on the floor throughout the season over there, he puts in a pushka. And he said that last year, and this year, sure enough, he gave us $54 for his pushka and asked for more pushkas because every time money fell down and got lost, he put it in the pushka. So that was very, very impressive. That was again, the Jewish spark over there. And we hadn't, said anything. Although these 3 weeks especially, incidentally, is a very important time for adding charity. We're remembering the destruction of the temple, which was brought about through dissension among the Jewish people. That was the spiritual, let's say, reason.
Just say in conclusion that you say about charity, but in other sense that the disunity of the Jewish people also is one of the things that brought about the effects. And just by bringing together, like you're saying, that fusion, as you were saying before, and just making those reconnections amongst Jews, and really these people are, in a way, I wouldn't say lost, but physically they're lost and they're in the outskirts of Judaism, making that reconnection with them, that in itself, and connecting themselves up and doing another mitzvah, that in itself, I think, is enough to rebuild the temple. Hopefully that'll be soon, and we can take everybody from these outlying areas.
Sure.
I mean, not that Albany and the capital district is the center of Judaism, but in any case, maybe we feel that we're a little centralized here, and we'll go all to the land of Israel together. I think I want to thank you both for coming, and thank you on behalf of the Jewish community in Capital District and also around New York State to help out and giving, like I say, selfishly I think that giving up your vacation and helping Jewish people out. Thank you very much for being on the Jewish View.
Thank you very much.
Shalom. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center. Today we are seen at the Albany Jewish Community Center and with its Executive Director, Joel Groth. Welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Of course, Joel, that day camp probably is the center focus of the day in the summer here.
It is, but it really is not the only thing. We have a big program for senior adults continuing in the summer. We have our phys ed and swim program in the summer also, besides our day campers. And we also have a lot of activities for adults.
It's a well-rounded program. Let's go way to the beginning and the basics of the Jewish Community Center. Why was there a need for a Jewish Community Center, and what's the history behind it in Albany?
Okay. In the mid to late 1800s, the Jewish community in this country burgeoned. The immigration from Eastern Europe came in droves, and Jews wanted a place to congregate and recreate without a synagogue combined with it. So Jewish community centers, or YMHAs or YWHAs at the time as they were called, sprung up all over the country. Albany, as part of that movement, started at about 1915 with the YMHA, which was a group of young people that came together to socialize. And they began to learn to be Americans. Now we've swung the opposite direction and have tried to instill more Jewish flavor to the Jewish Community Center. But then the Jewish community really wanted to be Americans, and they had to do that in a Jewish setting because that's where they felt comfortable. The center started on Franklin Street in a room at the Hebrew Educational Institute and developed into Washington Avenue, into the old John Boyd Thatcher house, and then added on a swimming pool, bowling alley, gymnasium to that facility. They outgrew that facility, and in 1960 began in this facility, I believe, in the beginning of 1961, into their beautiful new home here on Whitehall Road.
Very good. So some of the activities that they do are mainly for the Jewish community, or, I mean, you have certain Jewish programming, as you just stated.
We have Jewish programming, but we're open to the entire community.
Very good. And from all ages?
We have programs from prenatal swim programs for before people are even born, all the way up to senior adults who are in their 90s that use our facility regularly.
We're going to take a tour of the different facilities in the summer, but maybe some special programs you'd like to talk about that we can't see up now. You know, you have certain programs during the year or holiday programs.
We have a tremendous Purim Carnival every year around Purim time. We have programs around Sukkot, where we have a sukkah that stands almost right where we're sitting now, out in front of the building. We have a big Hanukkah party every year. And one of the beauties about the center, by the way, is the intergenerational programming possibilities that we have. And holidays provide some of the nicest times for intergenerational programming. Today, I know it's like that in my own family, and I think there's a lot of people that are like that also. I don't have grandparents for my son to be around at every holiday because they live in a different place than we live. So it's nice that he comes to the center and he gets to be around senior adults who can provide that link to generations past for him. And I know in our community that there's a lot of people that don't have nuclear families and extended families right in the same community, and it provides that link for many people. Holiday times are probably the most difficult times to be without family, and so the center makes it a home away from home and helps people adjust to those times as best as they can.
I think that the Jewish Community Center also is very centralized for the community, since, like you say, that there are synagogues, there are temples in the area, and everybody belongs to their own specific one. I think this is the only institution really in the whole Capital District. There you can have that every people, like you say, different ages, but also from different denominations in the Judaism, that they can come in a centralized focus.
Right. We're not restricted by the dogma, I guess, that goes with each separate religious affiliation, whether it's Orthodox or Conservative Reform. and we're able to be a melting pot for everybody. There are some times when in the community it's nice to be able to meet people from a different synagogue, or in today's society, many people don't belong to synagogues, unfortunately, and this becomes their entree into the Jewish community.
I know I've noticed it many times in the community center, people that are unaffiliated and they want to have some connection in Jewish life, the center is really the place to go.
It's less threatening for them. They don't have to commit early on. As a social worker, one of the things that you're taught, and in my training, is that you start where people are. Sometimes people aren't ready to affiliate with what they perceive as a heavy-duty synagogue affiliation. So what they do is they come in a more recreational and cultural setting. They're comfortable, and then they make the step to synagogue affiliation. So it's a nice first step for many people.
I think that's important for the community at whole, and I think now maybe we can walk around and give us a walking tour of what the center's activities are.
Be my pleasure. Come with me. As we continue our tour of the center, it's my pleasure to introduce one of the key staff members that we have at the center. She's been around this place, I don't know how many years, but her name is Jeanette Gottlieb. She is the director of our aquatics program, and we have a beautiful day to look at the outdoor pool, but we also have a wonderful indoor facility. And Jeanette, why don't you say hello to the rabbi and answer some questions going about our program.
Let me ask you, Jeanette, we're here at the day camp. What is are you teaching the kids or letting them just splash around? What is the program for swimming?
We have a full set of lessons. We use the Red Cross progression for lessons, and you can see here we have beginners, intermediates. We also have a preschool program for our younger children who are not yet in school, where we teach them introductory skills, get them used to the water and to the idea of blowing bubbles and getting your tank.
Now you give out Red Cross cards and intermediate and advanced beginners that they have. So the lifeguards are teachers, not only
We have a full staff of WSIs, Red Cross certified. They're all certified as water safety instructors, lifeguards, and they have their first aid and CPR certification too.
By the way, Jeanette, the rabbi asked you that question just so you'll know he's very familiar with the Red Cross and some of the lingo that goes along there.
Very good. We wanted to ask you, now of course this is the day camp, but during the regular day, I'm sure, during the year, there's programs for adults also. Maybe you can tell us something about the adult swimming program.
Yes, we have water exercise for adults, we have aerobic exercise for adults, we have lessons for adults who want to learn to swim, we have lap swimming, we have a special route swim, that's something new coming this fall for people who have need for a flotation device or individual assistance on the water because of strokes or severe arthritis. We have a physical therapy program, and we have a master swim team, and we have an age group swim team, and we have all the Red Cross lessons for the children as well.
What's the youngest age group that we teach swimming?
We have a 6-month-old program for 6-month-old babies. And our people in our classes and our programs go all the way up to 90.
Good. From all ages, beginning to end. Well,
Beginning to end, everybody.
they say swimming's the best exercise, so I guess everybody gets in on it a little bit.
We certainly try to have something for all of our members in the swim program, as well as this time when members can just come in and enjoy themselves with open swim or do what they feel like doing, bring their family in just for play. So it's a very full schedule, but we've tried to anticipate the needs of the members.
We also have just renovated this year our outdoor pool filter. We have a brand new one, and also the bottom and sides of the pool have been refinished. Last year we redid the locker rooms, or 2 years ago we redid the locker rooms and the air exchange system for the indoor pool. So we basically have some very modern and up-to-date equipment that for our 2 free pools. children's playground. It's an award-winning playground built in the early 1980s by the Women's Service League and other friends of the center who donated the funds for it. Each piece of equipment is modeled after some Israeli architecture. For example, this is the port at Masada. This area here is Jerusalem. Another area is Akko, Old City. And this is Little Jerusalem. Looks a little bit like Jerusalem, but much smaller than our big city of Jerusalem that we have here. But what it's designed to do, in the bottom line, is to help children have fun, is to help them explore, be creative, and gain confidence, like most of the activities that we have here for the kids. And I can tell you from personal experience, my son loves the playground probably better than any other area at the center. Besides camp for little children, we also have a teen camp, which is probably the most unique camp in the Capital District for teens. It's an aqua camp where they go on the water and learn water skiing, sailing, canoeing, and it's really a very unique program which we're very proud of and which attracts this week, I think, 29 teens to that program, 6th through 8th grade. We also have specialty camps where we've had Sam Perkins here for a basketball camp one week. We have tennis camp this week. We have baseball camp another week. And the kids that like to specialize in one area of sports or another love to come to this program to have that specialty. And that's about it for specialty camps. In our continuing tour of the JCC, we not only have little 3-year-olds, but we also have people that are older than 3-year-olds. Not much older, but a little older than 3-year-olds. Mrs. Jean Strock, Rabbi, is one of our regular customers here at the center, and we feel like she's one of the family, and I hope, since I know I feel like I'm one of her family.
Yeah, but she's like my son, like I'm the boys.
Why don't you ask her some questions about
what
she
is
does?
some of the programs as yourself, maybe some senior citizen programs that you join in at the JCC here?
I go swimming in the morning, and then I have lunch here, and then I go to oil painting. One day I go to ceramics.
Yeah, you have such a full program. One second. In the morning, the swimming program is you have many seniors join together. It's
it's a full
just
class.
to keep exercising. It's good
Yeah,
that the
every day.
seniors have a program to. Everybody needs their
You
exercise.
know she didn't get disfigured just from doing nothing. She works at it, making sure she keeps that beautiful
No, I
figure.
work out, take a walk.
And the other activities of seniors, like the ceramics, these are senior
And oil
activities.
painting, right. We have,
Very good.
and then we have a showtime. You know Showtime.
No, I don't know. Why don't you
He doesn't
explain
know
it to me?
Showtime.
Showtime, we put a show on here for a fundraiser, and then we travel.
Well, like a theater, actually an actual theater of.
A show. That
Very
you,
good.
A musical, most
musical.
of the time.
How many do you do a year? Just a few, or
4 or 5. It's a cool.
that's pretty good. That's 4 or 5.
And then we have a choral group one day. We sing all over the city here. What else?
They let me come and visit the choral group, but they don't invite me to sing with them outside the room that they practice in.
He always comes in and says,
He's good for that. Why he doesn't fit in over here? That doesn't have to, maybe we need a cantor.
yeah, he fits good.
All right, that's good. And so you have many activities: singing, the theater.
Oh, yeah.
Other the seniors volunteer and help other parts of the JCC out in this.
Oh, sure, they have in the kitchen. There's volunteers,
Very good.
girls help in the kitchen. I don't.
We could not put our lunch program on and Monday night supper program on without the volunteers of the seniors
Oh, they
that
do a
help serve
wonderful job.
and
They
help in
really
that
do.
kitchen.
Well, I've seen it even in bingo night to help the fundraising for the.
Yeah,
there's
there's
many of the
volunteers,
seniors are over
sure.
there. Seniors doing that program. But I'm just saying, seniors in general have an
There's
active
a
part
million
in
things to
helping
do
out.
here if you want to do them.
Well, that's good that you join in and you
Oh, yes, fine.
participate
I've
in
been doing
many
it for
activities.
6 years.
Very good.
Swimming is great.
And we think our senior adult program, and I don't mean to belittle it when I say this, but it really helps keep the seniors alive in more ways than just physically, but it keeps them alive mentally and emotionally, and plays a very important part, and also helps the center function, so we each get something out of it.
Oh, yes, it really is.
It's good for everybody.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what would I do all day? I don't go to work, I'd be bored to death.
Keeps you active. Keeps you young in the heart. That's amazing. Well, thank you very much, and wish you many long years of health and good being.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear.
Program we have, Anton cooks up a storm, introduce you, although you probably know each other very well, to Joyce Pagoda, who is the director of our adult and family programming, which is, I think, one of our most important areas.
Joyce, maybe you can tell us about some of the specific programs that are geared for the family and the adults in the Jewish Community Center.
Certainly. The family and adult programs are just really now coming into themselves. We have started expanding the adult program tremendously. We'll be offering a variety of different language classes such as Hebrew and Yiddish. We are especially trying to reach out to those adults or families that are going to be going to Israel in the near future. The Yiddish approach is going to be light and a lot of fun. In addition to that, we'll be offering some wellness classes such as smoke stoppers and nutritional counseling. We offer some getaway days down to New York City. And in addition to that, some programming particularly for women. Last year, we held a very successful gala that was hosted by Mr. and Mrs. Sid Albert down at Capitol Rec with the show The Immigrant. This February, it's with great pleasure that we're able to announce that Mr. and Mrs. Albert will be again hosting the event for the show of Crossing Delancey Street.
Very good. Well, I see there's a well-varied program. Joel took me around to the little kids, to the senior citizens, and now that we see for the adults also, there's a wide programming in the Jewish Community Center.
And Joyce is really just now beginning to concentrate on developing the adult programming in response to what we see is a lot of need, and people have been asking questions. We don't need the center because our children are out of preschool, or we don't need the center because our children have grown up. But what they're really finding is that they need the center, and we're here to help them develop how that need is going to be expressed.
Very good.
Thank you.
Well, Rabbi, I hope you enjoyed your tour around the center. You see that we have things from daycare to preschool to after school to phys ed and getting in shape to senior adults. And the center is open 6 days a week for people of all ages. Membership is open to the community. If you'd like more information, call 438-6651, and we'll be glad to help you answer any questions and even give you a free pass to try the facilities if you're thinking about joining.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're taking it.
Shalom, Ima, that's my mother. Shalom, Abba, that's my father. Shalom, Mora, that's my teacher. Shalom, Chaver, that's my friend. This time, you tell me what the words mean. Shalom, Ima, that's my mother. Shalom, Abba, that's my mother. Shalom, Mora, that's my teacher. Shalom, Chaver, that's my friend. That's terrific. Shalom, Sipor, that's a birdie. Shalom, Caleb, that's a dog. Shalom, Hatul, that's a cat. Shalom, Chaver, that's my friend. Okay, this time you fill in the words. Shalom, Sipor, that's a birdie. Shalom, Caleb, that's a dog. Shalom, Hatul, that's a cat. Shalom, Chaver, that's my friend. Now let's do the whole song, and you sing the whole song with me, starting with Ima. Shalom, Ima, that's my mother. Shalom. teacher. Shalom Haver, that's my friend. Shalom Tzipor, that's a birdie. Shalom Kelev, that's a dog. Shalom Chatul, that's a cat. Shalom Haver, that's my friend. Zungali, gali, gali, zungali, gali, zungali, gali, gali, zungali, gali, zungali, gali, gali, zungali, gali, zungali, gali, gali, zungali, gali.
Shalom. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and welcome to the Jewish View. Today we have an old friend with us, Pinchas Schreiber, PhD candidate of mathematics at SUNY, and welcome, Pinchas.
Thank you.
Now, Pinchas has actually a very big distinction as being the first guest on our Jewish View, and I think that it's important to bring back to us. It was interesting the first time and see where his life has been up to in the last year and a half, and see what's been going on with you, Pinchas.
Thank you. It's nice to be back. There's been a lot of changes going on in the last year and a half in my life, that's for sure.
You can tell us about it. Actually, it's interesting. I mean, obviously you look as a religious Jew. You never were that way when you were young. You came into Judaism, and as I say that, in the meantime, you are married and actually took a year off from your PhD program, which is an extensive program, and decided, instead of learning about mathematics, learning about Torah. You can tell us about a year in Israel.
Yeah. First, just some of the circumstances leading up to it. My wife happens to be a musician. She plays viola. She's been playing all her life, so she's a real professional. And she had herself a job in the Jerusalem Symphony. So for a religious Jew, it's a very good job for her because she wouldn't have to worry about working on Shabbos. So when I first met her and I decided that I wanted to marry her, I saw an opportunity to go to Israel, take some time off from school, and go into yeshiva and learn. It was just what I needed. So yeah, that's what I've been doing the past year. I was in Israel, learning Torah, and now I'm back.
Very good. Well, it's an interesting phenomenon that a young person like yourself, and as we say, a typical home, if we can say that, if there is such an American Jewish person, ready to be a professional, bright, everything, born in America, born in the USA, and here people would say going back into time, and we can talk about that also, and becoming a traditional Jew once again, wearing the yarmulke, having the beard, the whole shebang from A to Z, and giving up, like I say, a year of your time from a PhD program in order to learn in yeshiva. It's a tremendous phenomenon that's happening, and I mean, maybe you can find other people in that time in Israel learning that way, or are you a one out of a million, or is this?
Oh, certainly not one out of a million. I think there's been a trend in the past couple of years. You're starting to see more Jewish people in particular that are finding out that the Torah lifestyle is a very real lifestyle, and it's in Israel you're seeing that there are a lot of what they call Baal Tshuva yeshivas springing up, where people who get more involved in Torah later in life go to learn. So I'm not the only one. There are people in Israel that I saw from all over the world.
It's interesting, and they're all learning Torah. They're all people coming back to their roots.
Yes,
so to speak. It's good that an idea that we'd like to also talk about. I mean, it's in the news, and I'd like to touch upon it because sometimes we have a different kind of view from people from correspondence and the 6 o'clock news. Being in Israel for a year, obviously you can have a pulse on what really is happening in Israel, and we all hear about the attitudes of the Israelis today, and maybe you can tune us in a little bit about what your feelings were of maybe for a tourist to be there, which is obviously the most position of most people listening, that they're not ready to pack up and live in Israel, but also even for someone to live in Israel today, what it means, maybe the jubilation of living in the Holy Land, and also, if we can be honest about it, some of the problems that are being there, and also for tourists.
Yeah, I think that I had a unique perspective on that because I went there knowing that I would probably be returning, but at the same time I went to live there for 10 months. I really got into the everyday living situation of being in the land of Israel. And certainly you can feel that the atmosphere is more tense. I mean, the people have been through several wars in the past 20 years, and going into the army is a very natural part of life for them. And it's not unusual to walk down the street to see people in green army uniforms carrying these big machine guns. Whereas if you were to see that in this country, it would be quite a shock, very surprising. So from my point of view, I was relatively safe walking on the streets of Jerusalem. There were certain parts of Israel, though, you had to be more careful. For example, going into Hebron. Kiryat Arba is a big Jewish settlement next to Hebron, but the city of Hebron itself is has a very big Arab population, and there have been attacks on Jews there. So that was a place where you could feel the tension. It was very thick in the air. So in fact, I remember when I was there, I went to daven at the Machpelah of the Avos, Avraham Avinu.
Where Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were all buried.
Right. So what happened was that I found someone else walking there, and he was carrying a gun. And, well, you know what the halach is on, maybe you can tell our audience what the law is about carrying a gun on Shabbos. That, well, usually you're not allowed to, but in this case it was considered a threat to life if people had to protect themselves. So
that was probably a bigger shock.
That was
right
a
on
big
the
shock.
Shabbos, on the peaceful Sabbath, people have to go to pray with machine guns in the hand.
Yeah, so the situation in Israel is certainly not ideal. But at the same time, while there, Israel is a beautiful country. I mean, it's our land, and it's a Jewish land. We should be back there. And the place has much potential, and hopefully it will actualize that potential soon.
It's very good. Again, going back to the Shiva program, the religious section, this is your first time in Israel?
Yeah.
Because I was actually, of course, been there, and people have gone there maybe interim. I haven't been there for a while. It's hard to go with all the kids, to say the least. I don't know if even if I'd want to go with them, bringing them around, it would be too difficult. But people go there for different periods, like every 3 years, every 5 years. See really a phenomena that they call more yarmulkes. Well, obviously, they're yarmulkes on people's heads. They're not just yarmulkes floating around, but they call them yarmulkes. The skull caps floating around more and more. There's more of a Jewish feeling, not a Jewish, I mean, you're in Israel, but more of a religious Jewish feeling when you go into Israel. It's these numbers. Did you, like you say, you felt at home? It was more of a religious atmosphere.
But certainly, a person who is religious has no problems walking around in the streets of Jerusalem with a yarmulke on his head. It's a Jewish homeland, so there are lots of Jews, and in fact, I think that a lot of people that go there that normally would not be wearing yarmulkes will feel very comfortable putting a yarmulke on. I think they'll probably feel very proud to be walking around Jerusalem wearing a yarmulke on their
That's good. Now talk about more of your studies, because I'm sure people are interested here. Of course, you're no slouch. You're a PhD in mathematics. It's a very difficult field, as I'm sure everybody, even if they don't know about mathematics, can imagine. And they would say, well, how could the Torah 3,000 years ago, that was written 3,000 years ago, be a challenge to a person's mind, for a person who's an intellectual, if we can say that, for a person that you're saying clearly intellectual stature? Were you intrigued with the Torah? I mean, most people have this idea that it's more like fairy tales and more baby stories, and here you have intense learning. You went from mathematics, a very hard field, and a very intense hard field, and you went into learning Torah. What was the comparison? What was maybe the difficulty? And did you find it intellectually challenging?
Well, as far as the intellectual challenge is concerned, it's very easy to, well, the intellectual challenge in Torah, especially in learning Gemara, I'm sure you will agree with me, is much greater than trying to learn a few pages of mathematics. You know, you can look at a page of Gemara and spend days just on one page. Whereas if you're studying some interesting mathematics, it's true, it might take you a couple hours to get through one page, but it's only a couple of hours.
So it is there. I think that's really big news for most people. It's an eye-opener, to say the least, because most people's knowledge is very cursory of Judaism, and it's like I say, it's very, either it's fairy tale stories or very basic Judaism. You do this, you don't, on Rosh Hashanah, May the high holidays, you blow the shofar, and they know that, but just be inspired, and people don't have a taste for the Talmud or the deeper aspects what Torah really can offer. And it's interesting that I tell people that, and I even sit down and I say, give me a half hour and show you, and that they're really amazed that it's so deep. And I mean, you say, well, I know I could say it, being a rabbi, maybe it doesn't come out so well, because, I mean, what else they'll learn? But here's a person, I mean, as yourself, is more, I think it's more newsworthy, where a person who's, like I say, right now, before and after this one year, involved in a PhD program in mathematics, well, like I say, no slouch program at all, and can make a statement that Torah was more challenging than even mathematics. I think that's, coming from yourself, I think it's a better statement than coming from me. I could say the beautiful Torah, and I love learning Torah, and everybody should learn Torah, and people probably write off and say, well, what else do you want a rabbi to say? But yourself here, like I say, coming not always in Torah, you can't say, oh, you were brought up this way. You were brought up in a secular life, like I say, like 90% of American Jewish people. And you can say that Torah is more warm, and besides intellectual, mathematics doesn't give you maybe a good feeling of understanding, but just a lifestyle it isn't. I mean, after you close your book, you're done with it, and now how do you lead your life, and what's worthy and fulfilling in life? And Torah can give one's that is we don't want to call it a religion. Religion is like, all right, 2 hours religion, or now we pray, but it's a whole lifestyle, and it can penetrate everything. So I think it's good.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, in that studying mathematics is very intellectually stimulating, and it does feel good when you're working on a piece of mathematics and you're trying to prove something, and you work through the proof and you see how you get from the beginning to the end. And it's very nice. But then when you close the book, what can you really take away from that situation? Whereas if you're learning a piece of Gemara, you work through from the same thing. They work through from the beginning of this problem to the end of the problem. And not only that, when you close the book, you get to take something away, some moral lesson
to go in your life. That's important. I think we can go into another thing of, just like you're saying, separate mathematics in one department, or even the United States, and Torah in Israel. But like you say, Torah does penetrate not only the intellectual, but also lifestyle. And maybe there's some way to bridge that gap, and so to speak, because Torah is not a separate compartment. People say, well, the Torah cannot be compatible with the world, and therefore, if the world is a truth in the world, well, it must be that Judaism is saying something else or something old-fashioned. And really much on the other hand, if it's the truth, and that means not it's a theory or everybody says so, but if you can actually prove it, is accepting scientific clinical standards, that this is the way it is, not just hypotheses and theories, which many things, many ideas really are. That everybody knows that the scientists say one thing about the age of the world one year, another year that they, they'll come up with another age. So obviously that can't be the truth. They themselves are contradicting themselves. But something we can say, this is 100% sure. as we know about, then really for the most part Torah, we can say Torah should say it first and science learned it later, but we could also find a complementary bridge. If this is a truth, and Torah is the truth, and Torah is telling us everything about the world, and then there really should be a bridge to say, well, if science says this, math says this, and that's why the math is better in a way than maybe the humanities, because you can prove it. You can have a psychological system, and we have to wait 50 years to see how people are affected, or you see there's a new way of raising children. We have to wait 20 years before they grow up, and we can have some data of how children are raised, and even then there's an argument. But in math, like I say, here's a proof. Is more science. So you build a ship. Is it sink or not? It's an airplane. If it doesn't fly, you know it's worthless. If it flies, then you say it's a decent plane. So mathematics, in a way, is maybe more of a pure science. But just to find some links between Torah and mathematics.
Yeah. Mathematics is just that, a pure science, and not only that, there's no contradiction between what the Torah has to say and what's been found mathematically. In fact, as you say, they complement each other very well. And I believe the reason is, as I learned in Israel, I was fortunate enough to be exposed to Rav Yitzchok Ginsburg, who's a very big Kabbalist, and he's very learned in Hasidus in Kfar Chabad. He might have moved recently, but he's presently trying to put together a book called Mathematical Structure in the Torah. And I was privileged to look at the first 3 chapters, and one of the things he mentions in the introduction is these are very mystical ideas, but he's just saying that there are 3 wisdoms that are brought into the world. So he describes them as the divine wisdom. There's a divine wisdom, which is Torah. There's a wisdom of physical, which is mathematics. And there's a wisdom of the spiritual, which is music. So that the Torah is considered to be more of the, what we call a panemius type wisdom, a more inward type, it's more revealed that this is God's wisdom within the Torah. Whereas, so what I'm trying to say is that the truth originates from within the Torah and emanates to the outer aspects of knowledge, where mathematics would lie. So I came across some examples last week while I was learning from the Tanya, which was written by the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidus. So I guess the best way to do this is just to introduce a few mathematical concepts and then see what the Alter Rebbe has to say, and just to show that there's no contradiction, that mathematics can describe very well this wisdom that we have in the Torah. So there's one idea, is the idea in topology. We talk about something called a covering space, where we have a particular set, and we talk about having a function. Well, let's see. We talk about, first we describe what it means for a set to be evenly covered. So at the risk of confusing the audience, talking about a little bit of higher mathematics, we just talk about mapping from one space to another space, your base space, and then we say that we're covering this base space if we can come up with a bunch of we can split the original space into equivalent spaces where each one could get mapped down into the base space. Now, what's the correspondent that I'm trying to describe in the Torah? Is that this world we live in the physical world, and it's taught that there are, for everything that occurs in the physical world is something, it reflects what's going on in the spiritual world. Now, in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe mentions that there are many worlds. So to me, I'm thinking that each of these worlds correspond to each of these spaces in the original space. And each of these worlds can get mapped down into this world. In other words, what's going on in the world up here corresponds to something that's going on down in your base space, in your physical world. And then another idea.
Got an algebra textbook?
Yes, this is an algebra textbook. And there's a branch of algebra known as group theory. And then mathematics is very specialized, so you can talk about group theory, and then we could talk about certain types of groups. So we're going to talk about free groups. And in order to talk about free groups, we have to define a few terms. So if we start with an alphabet, we'll call our alphabet A. An alphabet, as we know, consists of letters. And these letters can be combined. And when we combine letters, any finite number of letters make up a word. So how many different combinations of words are there? Well, depending on how many letters you have in your alphabet, how many different types of letters, of one-word letters are there? Well, that depends on the number of letters in your alphabet. How many different types of two-letter words are there? Well, you take the number for the first space times one less for the number for the second space. For example, in our alphabet we have, well, in the Hebrew alphabet there are 22 letters. You could make 22 different types of one-letter words, then 22 times 21 different types of two-letter words, 22 times 21 times 20 different types of three-letter words, or if you want to repeat letters, there would be more combinations. So you can continue making these finite words, but the number of combinations that you're going to have will get very large. So I just like to point out something that the author Rebbe is talking about in the Tanya, which in our daily learning we learned last week. He says, when he's talking about the created world, he's talking about all these worlds, all of the worlds, all the spiritual worlds, and even the physical worlds. They're ad infinitum. That he mentions that there are an infinite number of them. Well, why is this? He says that it comes from the combinations of the 22 letters of the word of Hashem. So, and then he mentions that these divide into many more combinations, truly ad infinitum. And then he mentions it as stated in Sefer Yetzirah. And then he says, 7 stones build 5,040 houses. From here on, go and count what the mouth is not able to express. So what he's saying there is that when you just look at how many combinations are there for 7 letters, for 7-letter words, you get 5,040. Which is a very large number. And then he says, from here, go on and count what the mouth is not able to express, indicating that there's going to be an infinite number of combinations if you just keep extending the lengths of your words. So he explains in the back, in the footnotes, the whole idea about this relationship, 7 stones build 5,040 houses. The interesting thing here is that this is the formula of factorial, which is a mathematical concept. For example, 7 factorial is 5,040. What does that mean mathematically? 7 factorial is 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. 3 factorial is 3 times 2 times 1. And this is a function that increases very fast, that the 10 factorial will be much larger than 7 factorial by taking 10 times 8, 10 times 9 times 8 times 5,040. The interesting thing is that this is something that was written in the book Sefer Yetzirah, which was written by Avraham Avinu 3,700 years ago. 3,700 years ago, he's talking about a concept when you consider the mathematical sophistication of the world. It's just mind-boggling that he had access to this. And the reason he had access to it is because this was in the Torah, and he had access to the Torah, and the knowledge of the Torah. So this is where I see that there's no contradiction between mathematics and Torah, and that there's a support, that they're both wisdoms, and they're both true in their own, because they emanate from God, and that God is only truth.
It's interesting. So I think this is an important concept, like these certain things I could say as a rabbi, and again, and maybe peg this Judaism. But it's important for people because, unfortunately, I think people have more of a respect for a mathematician than the rabbi who's someone's learned in Judaism. The point is not a matter of respect, it's a matter of tuning people into saying, listen, Judaism, as we said, that maybe babyish, maybe fairy tale, very basic Judaism, and how much really can it tell, and how much can it really get into thoughts. And I think most people I talk to, when I try to bring out how intellectually deep Judaism is, and certain things, many people in many professions see themselves saying, hey, here's a concept. How old is this book? 1,000 years, 2,000 years Gemara, the Talmud, the Chumash, the Bible is 3,300 years old, and it's a concept, maybe even, like you say, very modern. It's 100, 200 years old that these concepts were only made, and here it is, all these concepts right there, and have you. Psychologically, we can go on to every field, and I've talked to many people in different fields and different professions, and again, if once they look into the Torah, they just say, well, it could be written today. The real news is, and I'd like to always deal with it, maybe we'll give you some homework for the next show, sit there and work on it in a later time, is certain things that maybe in mathematics would say, that Torah would say in mathematics hasn't come up with yet. Maybe some deeper concepts. That would be something interesting, something I'd always like doing, but obviously I'm not going to sit there and go for 10 years to get a PhD in mathematics, but maybe as you say that you're put in that position of knowing mathematics, and you have that, looking at it and developing that. I think that's an important point that you have to do. And it's a lot of respect that, and you can take off a year and learn the Torah and Judaism. Do you still have time now? That I'm sure it's a busy time once you're in a PhD program and you're teaching, but for people also to integrate the two fields. I'm sure you're learning mathematics, it goes without saying, but do you give time for Torah learning?
Oh yes, it's very important to me in particular to try and set aside time every day to try and learn some Torah and go to classes.
So always constantly learning. Well, that's why I think there's one other idea that I always said, and maybe in the higher fields, maybe it's not just true, but I'm sure it's true at all levels, is the Torah, is people think, well, it's the Bereshis, or you go over the Chumash every year, you just read the same old thing, or the Talmud. They didn't make any more Talmud. People think it's stagnant because of that. It's old-fashioned. You didn't add on to anything new, and it really isn't true at all. First of all, there are more commentaries, more and more commentaries are constantly coming out, but even the basic test, the primary text involved, that it gets deeper and deeper. And a lot of times I just tell people, listen, if you go to first grade arithmetic, 1 and 1 is 2, or whatever they're learning, 2 and 2 is 4, I don't think anybody would find any intellectual satisfaction by going back to 2 and 2 is equal to 4. Once you have it in your head, like you say, it's finite, it's there. There's nothing more you're going to learn about it. Maybe nostalgia, but just about it. I don't think you're going to learn anything more. With the Torah, you could go back to the same stories, really, and that you were taught 3, 4, 5 years old in kindergarten, and the greatest sages, the greatest, deepest thinkers will look at that same story, and they learned it also 1,000 times already, and they'll just go over it and find deeper meanings for it. So I think that's also something that I've always found. I mean, I'm not saying I'm learned as you in secular knowledge, but it's something that I think that we can find a contrast to also.
Yeah, I believe that, well, it's like when you say, you can't go back and keep learning 2 plus 2 is 4, but what that becomes is your foundation, and it becomes, we describe it as prerequisites, in that, the field is comprehensive, and it's the same thing with the learning of Chumash, that you think that what you learned last year, you're going to be learning it again. Well, no, it's already a part of you, it's part of your foundation. You get to go on that and build on that, and the Torah is infinite, so that there's always room to grow a little bit further.
Well, I think it's important. Well, I want to thank you, Pinchas, for coming again. So you're our first guest. Actually, you're our first repeat guest. So that's also a very important idea. And it's interesting because you can compare people in their own growth, and hopefully we're also growing. But I think you made a major leap. You've got married, and now you took a year of Jewish scholarship under your belt, and obviously you're advancing your PhD program. Goes without saying. But it's important, I think, just for you being here to telling people you can be a mathematics person, you can be a PhD scholar, you can go on to there. Hopefully we'll continue on your progress through life, and like I say, keep on learning different mathematics, and you're learning both ideas together. And I think to bridge the gap there, where people just don't have a schism in their mind, and I think most people do in that sense, compartmentalize their secular studies in Judaism, and they can't be compatible. But, I mean, I can't, maybe we need a scholar like yourself in mathematics at least to say that. I could say that, and I'm sure of it, and that's the way it is. I could say if something's the truth, then it's going to be that way, whether you're learning math or learning Torah, but you don't have the fulfillment and the holiness as one is learning in Torah. But somebody like yourself could say, actually, see, listen, you see, this is so great, and it's in mathematics, here it is in the Torah. You don't have to run out in secular studies and be astonished that they have something new, that something good and something truth is sitting in the Torah all along. So I think that's a very tremendous accomplishment, and I'd like to thank you for coming to join us, take on your busy schedule. Like I say, you're learning, you're teaching, you're doing so many kinds of things as a married man, and joining us once again.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center. Today we have a very special guest, Rabbi Label Wolf, that joined us all the way from Melbourne, Australia, down under. Welcome, Rabbi Wolf.
Thank you very much.
Now, in your expertise in working with Jewish life, many of your credentials include that you were the Hillel director at many universities right here in America before you moved back down to Australia. Before we deal with those issues at Hillel, I'd like to just people, I don't know how many people know about the Jewish community in Australia. I don't know how many people have even gone to Australia here from the United States. And maybe you can fill us in what it means to be a Jewish community in the deep south or on the other side of the world.
Certainly. I come from Melbourne, Australia. The Australian Jewish community is a fascinating one, albeit quite small. In fact, in the whole of Australia, we have only about 70,000 Jews, or 75,000 thereabouts, 30,000 in Melbourne and about 30,000 in Sydney. Nevertheless, for the relatively small size of the community, some absolutely fantastic Jewish developments have taken place. I suppose most initially it's true to say that the first Jews came to Australia as convicts on a very first convict ship back in the late 1700s. So Jews have been in Australia right throughout its history from the moment of inception. But it's also true to say that the primary Jewish development as such took place after the Holocaust, after the Second World War, when a great influx of Jews did come down to Australia to escape the ravages that had taken place in Europe. The interesting factor as far as the Lubavitch community is concerned is that at that time there were 4 Chabad families in transit in Paris. And the Friedrich Rebbe advised them to go to Australia, which was a veritable midbar, Jewishly speaking. They went to Australia, and there was only one Lubavitcher family in Australia, in Melbourne, and they were out on farm. They were farmers, and their farm became a halfway station for those 4 families and many other Jews who came down before they found work in the cities. Now, those 4 families put it to their minds that their task and work was to set up a Jewish educational system. And they were hugely successful, because if I tell you that the largest, for example, Lubavitch yeshiva in the world is in Melbourne, Australia, you'd be astounded. We have some 750 students. That's a junior school and a high school. But quite apart from that, Melbourne as a community enjoys the largest Jewish day school in the world. There's a Jewish day school, a traditional day school of some 2,500 students. And to think that that exists in Melbourne, Australia is quite fascinating, given the size of the community being as small as it is. And perhaps one other very interesting statistic is that in Australia, some 75% of all Jewish children go to Jewish day schools, which is a fantastically high figure, as you can well imagine. So in Melbourne, Australia, we have the full gamut and range of Jewish identities, ranging from the very Orthodox, be they of the Hasidic origin or the Misnagdic origin and the like, moving all the way across to the left, even to Bundists and leftists who have very little to do with Judaism. So in a sense, Melbourne is a microcosm of the Jewish world.
It was very interesting. It's been built up to that extent that people think that's got to be Israel or sometimes even the United States, but outside of these major centers, that it's that, like you say, it's a midbar, a desert of Judaism. But it's really, like you say, very much on the contrary. It puts the American communities to shame when you're talking about those numbers of involvement in Jewish community. Well, you were a Hillel director, and that's dealing with college youth, and that's really a whole different story in its own right, because it's far from being that Jewishly oriented. It's unfortunately well known that the Jewish youth on campus is very much not Jewish oriented in any sense. It's lucky if they do come even for the high holidays, and even then I don't know even know the percentage, but it's not close to 100%, which people may think. And then when you're talking about a Sabbath or a Shabbos program, the numbers are it's unfortunate to say about a Jewish youth that you're talking about 1,000 Jewish kids, and if you can get a handful sometimes to Jewish programs even on the Shabbos, then it's even decent comparatively. The people are proud of those numbers. You get 10, 20 students. How did you find the Jewish youth on campus, and is there any solution to get them re-involved in Judaism?
My work with campus youth has now spanned some 20 years plus. I first came from Australia to work with Hillel at the University of Wisconsin. It was 1969, 70. They were somewhat wilder days. I was at the University of Wisconsin with some 7,000 Jewish students, and the task seemed to be awesome. And I sought the advice of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Rebbe said, there are 7,000 Jewish students you have there. Your task is to try to identify and work with 7 of those 7,000. And if you work with those 7 will find their own 7, and those further 7 will find their own 7. In other words, the philosophy and approach in campus work that I adopted through the advice of the Rebbe was concentrate on a small number, ensure that you're able to dedicate your energy, your koiches, to help their development, and that way you have a sense of achievement as well as there will be in fact an achievement. One of the great difficulties that I find amongst many of my former Hillel colleagues was that they try to do amorphous large amount of work and achieve relatively little specifically with individuals. The name of the game, as far as I'm concerned, is not numbers, not to identify to some statistical analysis that some 200 kids came to some function but not necessarily had any meaningful input from that function. But I'm much happier in working with the 1s and the 2s and the 3s in a home-based environment. Let them experience a Shabbos, let them experience a Yom Tov, let them understand that there is a sophisticated aspect of Judaism that goes far beyond their bar mitzvah and bas mitzvah stage. And perhaps that's the real test for our youth today as well. Namely, whereas they perhaps develop some sense of Judaism up to bar mitzvah and bas mitzvah, and then very little subsequently, in a secular sense, they develop in a most sophisticated fashion, enter into the highest schools of education and tertiary education, and develop their thoughts and ideas far beyond their 12 and 13 years of age. Jewishly, however, they've remained stunted in their growth. So I think the important thing is to try to provide our youngsters, as they reach now maturity in their 18 to 25 age group, a sense of sophisticated Judaism. And it's interesting to note that when I teach Hasidus, for example, to students, they open up their eyes and say, we never knew that Judaism possesses such a degree of philosophy and psychology, which really provides us with a Jewish outlet to what we thought might otherwise have not existed. So really, I would say that the task for Hillel, the task for all people who work at a tertiary level, is to not sell your article short, not to sell your population short. Give it to them as it is, be honest, present it in a sophisticated manner, and they'll listen, and they'll listen hard.
It's a good point. You were talking about 1969, 70 is, like you say, the wilder times. But it's interesting, and I think that there has been a change. I'd like to see your opinion on it. It's just more people were idealistic in the 60s and the early 70s, and now people know the youth today in general, not talking about the Jewish youth in the 70s and the 80s, are more the selfish, the me generation, as they call it. But on the other hand, there is a phenomenal amount of numbers. I mean, even though if we can deal again with numbers, but you say every human being is important, but still, there is this awakening. People are interested in coming to a show. A number of people will be interested in keeping kosher now. Maybe not from such idealism, but just I really don't even know what is really happening. It's from a cultural standpoint, I mean, a connection to Judaism. They're not maybe in such a spiritual, like in the early 70s you had more of a spiritual awakening. They just say, yes, I want to identify with the Jewish people. Let's keep kosher. Yes, I want to find out what's happening in the synagogue. I'm talking about young people, professional people, and these Jewish people are looking, and they're constantly, I hate to say, but I'm amazed. I mean, in a good way, but I am amazed that people are coming to us and saying, yes, I'd like to know, I come to synagogue, I'd like to know how to conduct myself. Yes, I'd like to find out about kosher. It's a different kind of idea, but I think it's a changement, but like it may be that, and just again, I'd like to see what your opinion is about that. Just maybe what the Rebbe said, 7 brought 7. Nowadays, you're not just an exception. You don't have to be a radical, an idealist, to be an Orthodox Jewish person. And maybe that's what's seen, like you said, for it's 20 years ago since you said that remark. But I think it's like that. Yeah, keeping kosher. Sure, people are doing it. I should too. Maybe that's just what's really happening.
I think that it's true to say that the nature of the Jew has not altered. Basically, we possess 2 dimensions. One dimension is that part of us which keeps our body and shelter and food and wants us to maintain our physical integrity. But every Jew possesses the higher dimension which seeks to have greater meaning and fulfillment in life. So even though I think you've identified correctly that there has been a development in terms of the times, and the much more radical period of the 60s and 70s is truly behind us, and now we seem to be living in a much more staid, economically gold society, nevertheless, every Jew has a sense that beyond the basic requirements of life to keep our body integral, there is a wish to express ourselves in a higher form. And here once again is the role of Chabad. I mean, Jews possess many, many different responsibilities, and different groups within our community possess and identify various responsibilities. The responsibility of Chabad and Lubavitch is education. Now, there are many other tasks at hand. But just like in a human body, you have hands that have to carry out certain tasks, and feet have to carry out other tasks, a brain and heart. It makes no sense for the heart to try to do the job of the brain, and the brain to try to do the job of the heart. Similarly, within our communities, the role of Lubavitch is education. And there I think that Chabad has developed a great amount of expertise in that regard. And tapping into the modern times, which are times where a young person and an older person recognizes there's more to it than just dollars and cents. And the Jew would be more than willing to accept some mechanism and means to develop their sense of fulfillment. And that's why our role is very much to be that of lamplighters. And the idea there being basically that even a stone possesses a spark. If you rub 2 stones together, you'll get the fire. So even the Jew who is the most distant and removed from his community, the idea of a lamplighter is to move it around a bit, create the spark, and no question whatsoever that Jew will be most interested to lead a more fulfilled life.
The spark hopefully is turning into a flame that more and more people, it's like an X kind of idea. On one hand, we're seeing the intermarriage rate going up. You're going to diverse qualities in the Jewish community. The intermarriage rate, the assimilation is outstanding. But on the other hand, there's a whole community of Jewish people that are looking back into their roots and trying to be a greater Jewish person.
Yeah, sure, there's a divergence. And as we move further and further away from the source, you'll have more people moving away. But I don't necessarily place them at great fault. By and large, I've more or less identified for myself that those Jews who tend to move away more or less as a result of inertia. In other words, the responsibilities of other Jews to have encountered them and move them back across just hasn't existed. Every person who's moving in this direction away from Judaism, I found that if you speak to the person, develop a relationship and warmth with the person, not lecture the person, not to give mussar to the person, not to tell the person off, not to say, hey, you're doing the wrong thing, but get the person to see what there is in Judaism, a positive approach. Every Jew who's moving away along an assimilatory track would be bent further towards the center. And I have no doubt that the only way to combat that is that every Jew, be he belonging to a particular movement or another movement, has a responsibility to reach out, not to be embarrassed to encounter another Jew and identify himself and shake hands, give a shalom aleichem and say, would you like to learn something? Would you like to come to my house for Shabbos? I think that's where it's all at. We've got to be more activist in a quiet way in our approach and tackling, and we'll stem the assimilation if we're all genuine about it.
It's a good idea. You find that in Australia, is there any, you can find a difference between college youth than in America, where it's more of an assimilationist idea? But you said that there must be these young people going to full day school, and then if they go to college, they're bringing, of course, that Jewish life into the college, and again, we could say that maybe one person brings another.
Sure. It's true to say that I would think that in Australia the situation is considerably better. Let's not forget that in Australia we're talking about the second and third generation Australian. Let's not forget that in Australia we don't have a particular norm of kids leaving home to go to colleges. It's all commuter campuses right in the heart of our own communities. So the kids come home every night. They're part of the tightly knit European-based community. So it's not as disadvantaged as many of the settings here in the United States. So to that extent, I suppose we're considerably better off.
You just bring an interesting point up, because you really, people figure that the assimilation rate, and it is the college youth, because they are going away from home. It's interesting. It's just that point of going away from home, going away from the parents will remind them of Hanukkah. And like you say, I'm not talking about a deep spiritual, idealistic kind of Judaism. You go to camp and say, hey, it's Hanukkah. And everybody, oh, it's Hanukkah. And they immediately respond to Hanukkah. Oh, I didn't know. And why didn't they know? If they like Hanukkah, why didn't you know when Hanukkah is? Because the parents, they were, for the 18 years, the 20 years that they were in their home, the parents said, oh, today is Hanukkah, let's light the Hanukkah menorah. No one's there, they're all alone. No one on campus is telling them it's Hanukkah, unless it's, like you say, the Lubavitchers on campus or some Jewish programs telling them that. But without that, their friends and the environment's not telling them it's Hanukkah. Oh, it's Hanukkah. And they lose it. And if you're there for 4 years, 5, 6 years, and in the prime of your life, when you're just developing your attitudes about life, and then Judaism is such, I wouldn't even say a back burner on that, it's almost non-existent to experience in part of your life, well, then it takes it from there. Then it goes into intermarriage, and it goes on to what kind of house you're going to eventually lead. But that's an interesting point, that you see where that you're going away from home is just is already the start of the assimilation.
Yes, certainly, and as I said, I think that's very important. But of course, that is the status quo here. The cultural norm is to go away from home. So the onus and responsibility in the United States to make sure that there is some sense of spiritual home away from home is that much greater. And that's why it's so fortunate that there is a Lubavitcher movement that takes this very much to heart. And the Rebbe sends his shluchim, his emissaries, to all these communities, and always emphasizes that the young people must be encountered in a meaningful manner and be reminded that there is a Jewish home. And by bringing them together in these various forums and the like, that provides a stepping stone back to their parents and back to their home life.
Building bridges, that's the major idea behind it. Now, going back to Australia Life, for example, I know people are always interested in far-off communities, and sometimes we think around the Capital District, far-off communities like Vermont is close enough, but it really is, in a certain sense, the boondocks. We're talking about kosher food, and that's always an issue because the two kosher butcher shops in the Capital District literally supply a tremendous radius because there's just only small communities around it that can't support a kosher butcher shop. I would think either the shipping or how does the community survive, for example, or like the moil, the people who circumcise, the sofer, these are all part of the Jewish communities. The kosher, for example, is a tremendous amount. Or even rabbis, maybe have their own rabbinical seminaries.
Yes, Melbourne is, and Australia generally, is very self-sufficient. We have our own facilities right with us, intact. We don't have to bring food in from anywhere else. We have our own sheikhdim, we have our own moelim, we have our own butcher shops, we have our own whole set of facilities, rabbinical college, kolelim and the like. We have some 20 synagogues in Melbourne and 3 temples, so you can see the orientation of the community as such. So although it might appear that Australia should be, by virtue of its distance, cut off from all the Jewish supplies, I can quite readily say that it is probably more intact than most communities in the United States.
That's interesting. It just goes back to that point that, and I've made also a point that some people think that where do you get the Jewish people from? And you would think it's from the Jewish nucleus, but I say it's really, and it's an interesting effect also, is that I think the people that are farther away, like you say, Jewish people want, and maybe they, well, I'm in a Jewish neighborhood, and there's a Jewish newspaper, and then they satisfy themselves with that Jewish identification, where sometimes, like in your far-off community, you think, well, there's no Jewish life there, and the Jewish people, again, must be non-involved to any extent. And maybe they can't be involved, so to speak, with a Jewish community center and the different Jewish institutions that are involved in a bigger city. But their feeling is even more there because they're yearning for something. They want to be attached. So sometimes when you go out to, like I say, the boondocks in a small community with a few Jews, and they see, rabbi, they immediately respond, oh yes, I want to identify myself. Sometimes we find that with intermarriage of the wife because the father is non-Jewish, so therefore they don't belong to a synagogue, and therefore the child's not getting a Jewish education. But like the woman, and like no one's evil, like you're saying, and she's not a bad person. She has a Jewish feeling inside of her. Her kid, a Hanukkah, Purim, something, and therefore there's a Hanukkah party. They're almost sometimes the first to really respond because they have nothing else, so they really want to. I don't know if that's really you can say about Israel, but it's almost that idea. You'd think people will automatically, well, farther away from Jewish life, New York City or Israel, well, they must be away from it. And on the contrary, sometimes maybe, a person, I don't know, you can say the attitude in Australia, they're so far away that it is an island, they're so far away from Jewish centers out there, practically in the Orient, that maybe they surely want to connect themselves either with the Jewish day school or the Jewish institutions of some sort.
Yes, that's quite true what you say. But it's interesting in terms of the issue that you raised, say, kashrus as such. One of the great difficulties is that we just don't perceive the importance of it. We have a sense of kashrus as a meaningful, traditional, identifying factor. But how many of us really have an appreciation that keeping kosher as such really promotes something terribly important in your own growth as a spiritual Jew? I was always very impressed with an example that was given that in the following terms. There are a certain percentage of babies that cannot tolerate milk, whereas the vast majority of all babies obviously veritably live on milk. A small percentage, if they touch the milk, they would die. That degree of allergic reaction. So it means that whereas for the majority something is good for minority, it may be exactly the opposite. And the truth, that holds true very much for the Jewish people in kashrus. For the vast majority of the world, eating non-kosher food is really what maintains their strength. As far as the Jewish people is concerned, eating the non-kosher food cuts us off in a spiritual sense from our energy and growth as Jews. We're like those small percentage of babies that cannot tolerate the milk. That's the way God programmed it. But what we do is we don't really believe that all too often. And the truth is we actually see it over the many centuries of our existence. And we say, oh, it's only a traditional element. Let me assure the people watching, it's much more than just a traditional element. The keeping of kashrus actually promotes the spiritual well-being of the individual. And if one really understood that, then one would really be moving further. And perhaps if one doesn't truly believe that, there's a chance. And if there's a chance, what does it hurt to go to a kosher butcher shop?
It's involved. People have to see the concern and the importance of doing the mitzvahs. I think, and that's why I just say though, in a good light. I think people more and more are seeing that. I think that maybe that, like you say, a few generations, but a generation ago, people were kidding themselves. Well, I'm Jewish and Jewish-minded enough. Or now, it's become an either or. And it's not, no one has to do everything 100%, I'm saying, but people are getting away from kidding themselves that, oh, my kids will be good Jewish people. People are just not saying that attitude anymore because they know that it's either you give them a good, solid Jewish education where they have a good Jewish feeling, and then there's no guarantee, but there's a good chance as any that they're going to grow up as good Jewish adults. And if you don't have that, people aren't saying, oh, they'll be a good Jewish people, because now after all the assimilations, the intermarriage, I mean, people aren't assured of themselves, and people are looking, like I said, to finally getting to see that the Torah mitzvahs is not just from a fiddler on the roof, but there's something integral, like you say, part of the physiology of a Jewish person.
No question about it. And I think a lot of parents and grandparents sell themselves short. They don't recognize that carrying out the various and perhaps only a few of the halachas at home, lighting of the candles, keeping of the kashrus, they don't recognize that these small, relatively small items can leave a tremendous impact. Very often the mother lights the candles week after week and she wonders, what impact is that having on my child? My child might not appreciate it, and my child might be cynical of it in their teenage years, etc. And very often the parents lose heart. Let me assure the parents that that same rebellious child at the age of 17, 18, 19, 20, if the parent keeps it up at the age of 25 and 30, when the child is 25 and 30 and is a parent themselves, that's when we're going to see the nachas. That's when we'll see that the results of the parental effort has left a very real impact on the child. Even though there may have been that aberration of 5, 6, 7 years when the child appeared to rebel and not to take notice, it comes back. I've seen generations go through, and I just want to tell all parents, they have to maintain their Jewish posture, notwithstanding what appears to be on the surface happening with the child, because at the end it leaves a very deep impression. And the Bobas and Zedas can in many ways inject into the home what the parents can't do. Because, I'll tell you an interesting little vort, why is it that the kids love their grandparents? And the answer is they have a common enemy, the generation in between. Let the Bobas and Zedas use their position of advantage, of the love that their grandchildren have of them, to maintain also a solid Jewish base, because they'll also leave a fantastic impact on their grandchildren.
I think that's very good. I tell seniors that, and usually, again, the gist of it, the young generation, they're not going to listen to me, and that's how they're made to feel, that you're worthless and you're just bothering us and just going to the old age home and leave us alone. But really, I tell them that very much on the contrary. Don't tell me there's no such a thing. I tell these people that you're the matriarch, the patriarch, the grandparents say something, and you put your foot down and saying that I'm keeping kosher, and if you want me to go to the wedding, then it's got to be a kosher wedding. You don't think it would make an effect if someone's grandparent didn't show up? And most people just say, well, I'll swim along, what can I do, this is the new generation. And I totally hold with this idea, and people have to understand how much really influence it can make. I mean, society tries to tell them, if you're not hip, you're not 30, 40, whatever, as senior citizens, you're almost worthless in society. Retire, get away, you're a mooch on society with your Social Security. It's totally not the truth at all. It's not the way Judaism looks at it, and it's not even Judaism. I think there's the people. They should say, yes, I have something to say, and I'm telling you what is proper in the family, and I know what Judaism has to say, and I think I'm not talking anything spiritual idealistic. I think every person would have to admit that any grandchild who naturally respects their grandparents, if they stand up for something in Judaism, that they're going to respect it. Maybe not immediately, but eventually it has to make a strong impression in their life.
Most definitely. There's no such thing as retirement in Judaism. I mean, it's totally ironical that as certain people get on in years, what we're saying is there's a wealth of greater experience there. So in our society, the more the experienced the person is, the more we tend to say, right, shove off, push off, you've had your years. Quite the opposite. When they're the most rich and mature with the experience of life is when they give most and contribute back into the community. So the Lubavitch Rebbe often says there's no such thing as retirement. He says, look at me. I'm still planning for 10 years ahead and 15 years ahead, and the Rebbe's obviously well in his 80s.
That's good. I think that's a good word for the seniors, and I think that's just a good idea because it's important for society. It's almost radical and revolutionary to say these things, that the seniors have such a force in society. But I think, again, society is coming around to that idea also that they could be very helpful and useful in society. I think we've run the gamut from the youth, from children in day schools. We talked about college, and we talked about senior citizens, and we've talked about American, and we talked about Australian. We cover every base in the world Jewry with you, Rabbi Wolf, and just like to thank you. I know you didn't come exactly from Melbourne, Australia to be at our Jewish View TV show, but who knows, everything's divine providence, and maybe this is the real reason you came to form the Capital District, that there's Judaism alive, America is not an island in itself, that there's Australia, and maybe put us to a little bit of a shame. That here Australia, which we considered, they're just a small little community on the other side of the world, they're doing so much and so well connected into Judaism. Here we are, we're close to New York City, so much life and Jewish life. Surely we should do a lot more also. Thank you very much for joining with us.
It was my pleasure, and I wish you all well.